Unitary Constitution. A unitary constitution refers to the one that concentrates governmental powers and authority in a single central government or legislature. The central government or legislature. The central government is the only source from which the powers emanate. It does not share governmental powers with any other body but can delegate powers to other subordinate bodies. A unitary constitution is guided by the principle of unitarianism, which means the belief and the concentration of governmental powers and authority in a single authority. So local or region or state government that exist in a country that adopt unitary constitutions are the creation of a central government for administrative convenience. They derive the powers that they exercise from the central government. Examples of countries with unitary constitutions are Britain, Italy, France, Belgium, New Zealand, Sweden, Ghana, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Ethiopia, Togo, Cameroon, etc. These countries practice what we call a unitary constitution. So when you look at a unitary, it's the opposite to federal, because in a federal constitution we said wherein governmental powers are being shared between the central government with regionals and subordinate bodies. But what happened in the unitary constitution is that the powers are being concentrated on one governmental powers or single authority or government or legislator. So you don't have, in fact, here the central government does not share powers, but it can delegate powers to subordinate bodies, but it cannot. So this is more applicable for countries that are practicing a unitary constitution, unitary state, not a confederal state. So they practice what we call unitary constitutions. We also look at another forms of constitution called Confederal Constitutions. This is a constitution in which almost major powers and functions of government are reserved exclusively for the component states, save the common currency, defense, and foreign affairs, in which the national central government may hold power. The constitution reserve powers to the central government in only certain matters that affect all the union or autonomous states involved. Confederal Constitution makes the component state very powerful while the central government becomes weak. Even the component states are free to secede when any of them wishes to do so. So the difference with federal constitution is that the federal constitution, it shares powers with regional subordinate bodies. But what happens, the central government is still powerful. But when you look at confederal constitutions, in most cases, in fact, the constitution is almost the major powers and functions of government are reserved exclusively for the component states, not even for the central government. But when you look at the federal constitutions, you discover that the major functions, they are exclusively reserved for the central government. That is the government federations. That is why we said mostly in the exclusive list when it comes to the issue of defense, when it comes to the issue of currency and foreign affairs. But the opposite is with the Confederal Constitutions. In the Confederal Constitution, what happens? Almost all major powers and functions of government are reserved exclusively for the component states, not the central government. are reserved specifically for the federal states, that is the central government, and we find them in what we call exclusive list. You have those we call concurrent list. That means there are functions which can be performed both by the central government and those regional bodies or states. But when it comes to the Confederal Constitution, these constitutions is to a very large extent its reserved powers are exclusively meant for the component states, and this constitution reserve powers to the central government only in certain matters that affect the union or the autonomous state involved only. But when you look at the Confederal Constitution, it makes a component state very powerful, while the central government becomes weak. Even the component states are free to secede when any of them wishes to do so. If they want to become independent on their own, they will. So let me remind you once more, don't forget to subscribe if you have not yet. If you have subscribed, it's okay, but if you've not subscribed, click on the subscribe button, and also we want to hear your view, your comments as well. So therefore, when you look at the types of constitutions we've made mention, we have what we call written constitutions or written constitutions, we have rigid constitutions, we have flexible constitutions, we have unitary, we have federal constitution and confederal constitutions. Our next lesson will try to look at the advantages and disadvantages of all of these constitutions. So if you look at the written constitution, you discover that it's almost the opposite to the unwritten constitution. Because when we talk about the written constitution, we say we are a whole body of fundamental laws, custom, principle, conventions, rules and regulations are being codified or found in a single document. When you look at the unwritten constitution, it's the opposite. The whole body of fundamental laws, custom, principles and conventions are not being found in a single document. But in actual sense, when you talk about unwritten constitution, it doesn't mean that those laws are not in existence. In other words, they are not written laws. But the point here is they are not being found in a single document. Then when you look at the rigid constitutions and that of the flexible constitutions, the rigid constitution is the opposite to the flexible constitution, because a rigid constitution is a constitution that has difficult or stringent amendment or cumbersome procedures for it to be amended. In fact, it requires 2/3 majority for any major changes on that particular constitution. For instance, when we look at Sierra Leone 1991 constitution, it's a rigid constitution. If to change the tenure of office of the president, it not all, even parliament all by itself can do it. It has to conduct a referendum. There are other major changes of the constitution. If it should be done in Sierra Leone, it requires 2/3 majority of members of parliament. So when a constitution is having a very stringent, cumbersome, difficult procedures to amend, then it becomes a rigid constitution. So when you look at the flexible constitution, it's the opposite. We are talking about a constitution where its amendment procedures are not stringent, they're not cumbersome, they're not difficult. And by with a simple majority, you can easily amend. In fact, the laws are just like when you're making ordinary laws. We refer to that as a flexible constitution. Then of course we also talked about the unitary constitutions. What is the difference with the unitary constitutions and that of the federal constitutions? In the unitary constitutions, you discover that governmental powers are being concentrated on a single authority. In other words, the central government does not share powers with any regional bodies or subordinate bodies. So what happens, even though it can delegate to subordinate bodies, but the constitution does not make provisions for the sharing of powers. But the federal constitutions, what happens in the federal constitutions, you discover that the powers of the central government are shared with regional or state bodies. Even though in the federal constitutions there are certain powers that are exclusively meant for the central government, or what we call the federation government. We found them in the exclusive list, and these powers has to do with finance, it has to do with currency, foreign affairs and defense. Then there are other laws which are found in a concurrent list